here, you should, on your screen, you should see the screen, the PowerPoint for the webinar itself, and you should have an option, a little bit button there to enlarge it, to make it full screen. And you should also have a chat box where you can talk to us, ask us questions during the webinar. There we go. Just a couple of messages streaming in that say, I hear you. We're going to wait another minute or two to give everyone, even the latecomers, a bit of time to arrive, and then we are going to start. So in the meantime, you can take a minute or two to sort of look at the system, make sure you see all the buttons and see where you have your volume button and where the chat box is and where everything is, so we're all ready to go. All right, so before we start, I just sort of want to get an intuition for who the audience is today. So I'm going to pop a survey up on the screen. I'd like you to take a second to answer it. So how many times have you taken the GMAT, those of you attending our talk today? All right, that's quite impressive. So let's end and share the results. So it looks like the majority of you have not yet taken the GMAT, which is excellent. This is going to be a webinar aimed mainly at people who have never taken the GMAT before, but also extremely important for those who have and those who need to improve. So first of all, my name is David from examPAL. With me today is Michelle from ARINGO. What we're going to talk about today is mainly how you can prepare for round one as best as possible. And essentially, the majority of this talk on my end, I'm going to talk for the first half hour, and afterwards Michelle is going to provide another half hour on admissions, how you can build that best admission profile for your round one application. But during my half hour, what I'm going to talk about is how you can get into that super desired 700 club. What are the required traits? What you need to do? Can you do it? Can you not do it? And the answer is yes, of course you can. And so what we found over many, many years of research, examPAL was established by a few dozen tutors. We're an online platform. We work with students internationally from 156 countries. About 45,000 students have passed through our platforms up till now. What we're especially good at, what we do for a living, is we use our PAL system, which I will talk about later. This is an online algorithm to help personalize for each student the best approach for that student. And in addition to the online platform where you can access the videos and see them at your own time, at your own discretion, we also have 24/7 support from professional tutors such as myself. If you like, you can open up a free account on our website, and we're also available in many different platforms, and that's all the sales I'm going to do for now. Let's jump right in. So, as many of you said, you are first-time GMAT test takers, and one of the big myths traveling around about the GMAT is that you need to be a super genius to get a high score. You either need to read really quickly, or you need to have a math BA, or you need to just be a really smart person in general. And the answer to this question is a flat out no. This is a myth. This is not true. And what we've seen over years is that there are a specific set of character traits that really, really identify people who manage to get above 700, manage to break the 700. And these character traits are not about being geniuses, okay? And as this might also surprise you, these character traits are not about solving thousands and thousands and thousands of questions either, all right? In order to get that 700 score, in order to get into the 700 club on the GMAT, you need to be focused and you need to be efficient. That is to say, you need to answer the questions that are right for you. Just answering 10,000 questions is usually exhausting. It's usually frustrating because you're trying to do something that just isn't the best way for you to do it. And it's also the wrong approach. And it's the wrong approach because what the GMAT actually needs you to be able to do is to be cognitively flexible. And what do I mean by this? What do I mean by cognitive flexibility? So when we talk about cognitive flexibility, what we're talking about is the ability to quickly find the fastest way to solve each question, and then to apply that specific method. So when you look at a question, you need to be able, within the first 10 to 20 seconds of looking at that question, to be able to decide, even less actually, 5 to 10 seconds is usually enough, to be able to decide how you want to approach that question. Do you want to translate the whole question into equations? Do you want to try maybe picking numbers or try eliminating answers? Do you maybe think there's some kind of underlying symmetry, or should you maybe make a small drawing? And what you have to realize is that every single one of the questions on the GMAT is solvable. So if you were to sit at home, if you were to have all of the time in the world, you would solve the entire exam, no worries. But you can't do that. You have approximately 2 minutes per question on the quant section and a bit less than that on the verbal section. So you're not actually being asked, am I capable of solving this question? Am I capable of writing out a full answer to this question? Instead, what you're being asked is, can I solve this question quickly enough? Can I get to the right answer within the given amount of time? Okay, and this is what we call cognitive flexibility. And the way that we build it, and what we see in students who have it, is a combination of having all the right tools in their toolbox, and a combination of self-reflection, of being able to review your own mistakes. And we'll get into both of these in detail today. All right, so the PALgorithm, how does it work? What is it? And why did we even choose that name? So the PALgorithm, the PAL, comes from precise, alternative, and logical, which are the three main methods that we categorize different solution approaches in. All right, the precise approach is what most of you are familiar from any sort of class you've taken in high school or college. This is basically, you look at the question, you translate it into equations, and then you use those equations, you work through all the calculations, multiply, divide, and so on, and whatever. And then you arrive at an answer, you look for that answer in the answer choices, and you mark that answer. The alternative method is a little bit like hacking the question. It's how you can get to that right answer without actually knowing why it's the correct answer. So for example, if 4 out of your 5 answer choices are completely impossible, they can't be the right answer, then you know that that 5th answer choice must be correct, but you don't actually know why it's correct. So there are a variety of tools that fall under this category, and these tools are very, very useful, as we'll see. A, for getting the answer right quickly. So it can shave off half a minute or so, even more sometimes, from the amount of time it takes you to solve the question. And B, it's very, very useful for dealing with those questions that you just don't know how to deal. They just happen to be above your solving ability, or you just forgot, or you're in a blackout, or whatever. It doesn't matter. But these tools can help you get to the right answer quickly, even without knowing why it's correct. Final bit of PAL, the L, is for logical approaches. And when we say logical approach, especially in quant, what we're referring to is using basic properties or symmetries. And for example, this can be addition or subtraction of odd numbers or even numbers. This can be all kinds of various powers and roots rules, such as a square power is always positive. And based on all these types of various properties, there are many questions, especially in ratios and in integers and equation-related questions, that you can solve without actually making any calculations at all. We're going to see a few examples later on. When you get deeper into the GMAT, then you'll see, for example, there's a question type called data sufficiency, where you're not actually asked to solve the question at all. All you're asked to do is to find out if you have enough information to solve the question. So if you really wanted to, could you take the information in the question and solve it? And these types of questions, they're called data sufficiency. They're usually best to solve with logical approaches, because you don't want to calculate. You don't want to waste your time actually doing the calculations. You just want to know, can I solve the question? So that's the PALgorithm in a nutshell. And what is really, really important for you to realize is that you're not only learning the material when you study for the GMAT. You're also learning yourself, and you're learning the question types that you see. So when you look at a question, what you need to be able to understand, what you need to be able to infer from reading the question is, A, what type of a question is it? Which is to say, is this a question most easily solvable by precise equation type approaches, for example, because all of the information is there in the question stem and you just need to plug it in and solve it? Is it maybe better solved by an alternative approach because the calculations in the question are extremely complex, but there's this really fast shortcut that straight away gets you there? Or maybe is it better to use a logical approach? And the second thing that you really need to focus in on when you're studying for the GMAT is your own personal strengths and weaknesses. So some of us, as mentioned, are really really good with equations. We do equations for fun on the weekend. When we go to the beach, we have a little pad and we sketch equations on it. Whatever it is, when we're bored, we do powers of 2 in our head. There are those of us like that out there, and for those of us that do enjoy that sort of thing, then the precise method is usually going to be the best way to go. There are other ones of us who are really good at strategic guessing, at taking a bunch of options and seeing, I think that one's probably going to be the most likely. And there are those of us who reach judgments very quickly. Some of us are sort of maybe a bit more anxiety prone. So we do our calculations and we start fretting. Did I do the calculations right? Did I do them wrong? Maybe I missed something. Maybe I didn't. So each one of these specific character traits, and there are many others, of course, it usually affects how we should approach a question. It usually affects what types of questions will be problematic for us and how we manage this. And I'm talking so long about this because it really is important. We're going to talk about something called a plateau later on. But generally, even when you look at students, when you look at different students, then you'll find that most students reach what we call a plateau phase, which is after you've been studying for a while, you know the material, and yet you still can't break that 650, or you still can't break that 680. And the reason for that is that it's just not enough to know the material. All right, you also need to have a good strategic plan, and this derives from these two bullet points written on the presentation right now. Okay, so another quick slide about we at examPAL do. So when you solve a question on examPAL, we offer you a few solutions. We suggest which one, based on our statistics, would be the optimal solution for you. And we also suggest other possible solutions which you can look at. And the goal of all this is to expand your toolkit, and it's to help you get acquainted with what works for you and what doesn't. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through a few example questions. I'm going to showcase how the PAL system works and why we think it is amazing. And I'm going to emphasize that one of the important parts of the GMAT is being able to decide quickly what type of approach you want to use for a question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch over to the first slide, the question slide. I'm going to put it on the board for about 10 seconds, 20 seconds maybe. I'm not going to ask you to solve it. I am going to ask you to reach a decision as to how you would have liked to solve it. So if you were trying to solve this question right now, would you go with a precise approach of using equations, an alternative approach of maybe trying some kind of shortcut to get to the answer quickly, or a logical approach using some sort of underlying symmetry? All right, so 10 seconds. Read the question, make up your mind. Time's up. So how would you solve this question? All right, we have a decent number of votes coming in. All right, voting is closed. And so it's actually an even split. Usually what I see is that most people prefer precise, and that's about it. It looks like we have quite a bit of people who see some sort of underlying symmetry in the question, which is great. And we have a few people who also see an alternative approach. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to go over the precise approach for the question, which is what pretty much all of you are going to be familiar with, and then I'm going to show a shorter approach. So the precise approach to this question would start with just translating it into equations, saying, okay, if g is 10 less than twice h, then we can write that as an equation as g equals 2h minus 10. We can then do a whole bunch of calculations. We start off with h plus 2h because it's h plus g, that's the number of rooms in both hotels. Minus 10 is 425. And then, we isolate h, we divide it, we find out what g is, we find out what h is, and we get to the answer. All right, that's great. And it works, and it's important to say that, like I mentioned, every single question you see on the GMAT is solvable. So every single question on the GMAT can be solved by translating it properly into equations and then going through those equations and solving them. In this specific case, on our website, for example, about half of the students who used a precise method to solve this question took about a minute and a half to do it. And you might be looking at these calculations and saying, nah, it shouldn't take a minute and a half. It's going to take a lot less time. And the answer to that is it's sometimes surprising how you get small blackouts or how long it takes you to figure out what you need to do and how to translate something into equations. But you're right, this is a relatively easy question. It is relatively easy to solve with equations. However, what I'd like to show is that it's also much, much easier to solve with an alternative approach. And in this case, the alternative method, the alternative approach, is to say that, well, since the answers are right there in front of them, then we can just use them. So let's say that C was the answer. That is, G has that has 200 rooms. Since Hotel H has almost half of that, then H is going to have about 100 rooms. Since 200 plus 100 equals 300, that's way too small, so it definitely isn't going to be C. By the same logic, it definitely isn't going to be D, because then H would be 120, and together they'd have 360. And that means that it must be E. And if we like, we can verify. We can say that, well, H is about half, so it's about 140. 280 plus 140 is 420. That's it. That's pretty much it. We're done. And what we've avoided is trying to translate everything into equations and making calculation errors and transferring things from one side of the equation to from one hand of the equation to the other. We've avoided doing plus and minus errors. We've avoided doing all kinds of sometimes annoying things, and you'd be surprised how many calculation mistakes people make in this type of test, especially under time pressure. And we've just gone straight to the answers. And what's most noticeable, as I've said, isn't that the alternative methods are better, they get you a more correct answer. There is no such thing. There's only one correct answer. What's noticeable is that alternative methods statistically just take a lot less time. And this is important because when you're stuck on those questions that you need a lot of extra time for, you really want to have that extra time. All right, so we're going to look at another question now, and this we're going to use a more logical approach. And in this case, the logic is going to have to do with ratios, expanding and reducing. So, on a 3-day fishing trip, 4 adults consumed food costing $60. For the same food cost per person per day, what would be the cost of food consumed by 7 adults during a 5-day fishing trip? So some of you may be looking and saying 7 and 5 and 4. It's like all these weird numbers. I'm not entirely sure what to do. And the logic of ratios is that you can generally just expand or reduce them. So if the ratio, if 3 days of a fishing trip, a 3-day fishing trip costs $60, then we can say that a 1-day fishing trip will cost a third of that, which is $20. And if on a 1-day fishing trip, 4 adults require $20, then 1 adult is going to need $5. All right. And then so all we really need to do is now multiply that back up to 7 people on a 5-day fishing trip. We can either calculate that exactly, or we can estimate that it's somewhere between 150 and 200. And the answer choice is B. And once again, I'll note that you could easily have written this as an equation. All right, you could have written, you could have written an equation with the 3 days and the 4 adults and gotten to the $60. What we've done here is we've skipped the equation step altogether. We've just started off with 1 to 4 to 6, for 3 to 4 to 60. We changed that to 1 to 4 to 20, then to 1 to 1 to 5, and then we multiplied it back up to 7 to 5 to 175. And once again, this takes less time than the standard precise answer, although in this case, not a lot less time. All right, I want to also show an example from a verbal question. All right, we've gone over quant type questions so far, and I suppose you can imagine how the precise, alternative, and logical methods apply there. What you might have difficulty or more difficulty imagining is how they apply to verbal questions. And in verbal, things are a little bit different. So what we've found over time is that many of the students on verbal struggle with their timing. They just take way, way, way too long to solve questions, and they run out of time somewhere towards the end of the exam. And another thing that happens is that students tend to be confused by the answers. So especially, for example, in critical reasoning questions, where some of the statements are maybe correct and you're not sure, or in reading comprehension set questions where there's some little tiny detail that sort of seems to affect whether the answer choice is correct or not. You're not really You're not really sure what happens. In these cases, what we found is that it's actually a better idea not to read all of the answers first. So what you often want to do with verbal questions is you want to first sort of make your own opinion as to what the answer would be. And then you want to go look for that opinion in the answers. And these two types of methods can be lumped together as precise and logical type approaches. Precise if it's a specific kind of inference, and logical if it's a different type of logic. And alternative methods, in contrast, are usually just routinely going over all the answers and trying to eliminate those that work and those that don't work. So let me show you what I mean by this. And we're going to look at a critical reasoning question. Since there were quite a lot of people who haven't taken the GMAT before, then I'll just explain that in critical reasoning, you're given a small passage of text, and you're asked to make some sort of logical inference from that text. In this case, the question is, the argument logically depends on which of the following assumptions. So let's read the argument from it. It says the interview is an essential part of a successful hiring program because with it, job applicants who have personalities who are unsuited to the requirements of the job will be eliminated from consideration. All right, so if we are to take that passage and we're to summarize it in like a small logical flowchart, what would we say? We would say that basically the argument is saying that if you have an unsuitable personality, then the interview is going to make sure that you get eliminated and you will not be in that job. So this is the main argument. All right, job applicants who have personalities that are unsuited will be eliminated. That's the main core of this argument. And what you need to do is you can look at this and you can ask yourself, okay, what sort of assumptions are required for this argument to hold? And so again, the longer route to solving the question is to basically say, well, I have no idea, and then to go read A, go read B, go read C, go read D, go read E, and try to figure out if that assumption makes sense in the context of the logic, and that works if you're sort of sharp enough to the details. But very often it's more confusing than it is helpful. And what we recommend is for people to sort of make an arrow chart, for example, like the one here, and then look at it and say, well, okay, for this argument to make sense, we somehow need to strengthen the fact that interviews can actually identify someone with an unsuitable personality. That would essentially be strengthening the first chain of logic. It's saying that interviews can identify people with unsuitable personality, and therefore we can eliminate them. That is an assumption on which the argument stands. And then we can go and we can look for that specific answer choice in the options. And that is exactly what C tells us. Now you may be saying to yourself, well, this example is a bit contrived. You already know the answer, but it's not contrived. This actually works, this sort of thing. And you're not going to know in advance exactly what assumption you're looking for. But by drawing an arrow chart, by asking a sort of a pre-thinking question, asking yourself what sort of assumptions are required for this argument to work, or what sort of statements would strengthen or weaken the claim, then you can, about 2/3 of the time, you can have a good guess. You could have a good intuition for what sort of answer you're looking for. And then all you have to do is go and look for it. And this really does help avoid a lot of problems. Okay, so that was the PALgorithm in a nutshell, which is to say the way that we subdivide questions into different solution strategies. The next part, and this relates to the plateau that I mentioned before, is how you rapidly improve. So let's say you have your toolbox. Let's say you've gone through our course, for example, and you've seen many different solution approaches for each question, and you've also learned what works for you. Then sometimes students find that they just hit a glass ceiling. They just can't pass that 650 or can't pass that 680. And to pass this, to sort of progress beyond the plateau, as we call it, you need to master rapid improvement. And this really means that relating back to the 10,000 questions is a really bad idea. You don't want to just solve routinely many questions. This is the same idea here. And the thing is that every single mistake you made should be viewed as not as a mistake or something that, face palm yourself over, but as an opportunity to learn. You need to research every single mistake. And maybe this isn't true when you're first learning the material, when you're just learning all the fundamental properties, but it's definitely true if this is not your first time taking the GMAT, and it's definitely true when you're reviewing the material. And you can divide mistakes into 3 broad categories. A professional mistake has to do with just knowing the material, knowing the fundamentals. Did you know the rules? Did you not know the rules? For example, divisibility. A technical material is often carelessness. Did you make some kind of calculation error? Did you make sure you answered the right question? You'd be surprised how many people answer the wrong question and get the question wrong. Did you notice all the small details of the question? For example, where it said positive, or where it said integer, or where it said greater than, or where it said not. All of these little tiny words that can completely flip what you need to do in a question. These are technical related errors, and they have to do with focus and carelessness. And a third type of error is strategic, which is, did you maybe try using a precise method of equations for some kind of super complex quadratic equation or some kind of super complex fraction, instead of just plugging in a number such as x equals 1 and seeing what you get? Which is to say, was your strategy off? Did you just approach the question in the wrong way? And every time you make a mistake, you need to pause and you need to categorize that mistake, and you need to try to make sure you never do that again. Now, you can't minimize all mistakes, but you can learn to manage yourself. So you can learn what types of questions you tend to get wrong, where you tend to fail, and you can adapt your strategy so as to account for that, so as to make sure that happens as few times as possible. And afterwards, of course, you need to implement. You need to do more questions in similar veins in order to make sure that you've driven that mistake home. So how does this look on our website? What we see on our website is that you're given a question. After you answer the question, you'll see the official answer for that question. And you also see a small note. This is a small intuition as to why we think that specific solution approach is the best way to solve that question. How does the personalized part of our program work? The heart of it is this slide and a similar slide for solution tools. And it basically says that after you answer every question, whether you get that question correct or not, you mark why you got it correct or why you got it wrong. And this slide is important in two respects. In one respect, it helps us to learn you. So this is the heart of our statistical learning algorithm. This is the information that it uses. And in another respect, it's very important for you, for your self-reflection time. So when you read these types of prompts, which is to say, when you are asked what is the reason for your mistake, then you have to pause and you have to actually think about that for a second. You have to actually think about, why did I make a mistake? Was it maybe because I only tried out one number, or didn't try using numbers at all, or because I made a wrong assumption? And this helps you sort of go through your own personal checklist of how you should be answering questions. It's like reinforcement learning. It's repetitive learning, and it's very, very powerful. Okay, and I'll briefly, in this last part of my talk, go over the winning study plan. These are all written on blogs that we'll be happy to link to you afterwards as well, so I won't spend too much time on them. I will say that what we recommend is somewhere between 1.5 months to 2 months of prep time, which comes to about 120 hours. We recommend a rather intensive program, and this is so that you can really focus in, you can really learn all the things you need to learn, and you aren't sort of distracted by all sorts of external things. I will note that if you're not a native English speaker, it's likely that you will need at least an extra month of time just to read, just to brush up on your reading speed and your vocabulary. Note that many of the texts in especially reading comprehension are academic in nature. They're not the same sort of English that most people use in day to day. So it can just take time, especially if you're not a native English speaker. The first 50 days of the 2 months, you just basically need to learn the material. You can do this just by going through the course trail on our website. Everything is very neat and organized. It's very clear what you need to do, where you need to go next. We recommend about 2 days per topic, though of course this changes per person. It's really, really important that you A, take a day off a week. You don't want to burn yourself out. And B, it's really important that you read daily. I mean, you can just think about it for a minute, that if you manage to increase your reading speed by, say, 10% or 15%, that means you have that much more time to actually think about the questions or solve them, and not just sit there and read them. This really is important. I can't emphasize this enough. And it's also important that what you read is, let's call them academic quality articles. So for example, go read Scientific American or National Geographic, or various university newspapers, and not just general novels. And the reason for this is so you can get used to the academic style of writing. Once you've done that, once you've gone through the course, you need to review all the material. You should not take too many CATs. I know people love to take CATs. It's really important that you don't burn yourself out. Like if you take 3 cats in the last week, there's a good chance you're going to arrive at the GMAT and you're just going to be dead. You don't want that. Don't do that to yourself. Try to take 1 cat at 2 at most a week. And make sure that you realize that your cat is sort of a decent measuring device for where you're at, but it's mostly a learning tool. It allows you to check if your strategies are okay. It allows you to check if your timings are okay. It allows you to verify what types of questions you're good at, what types of questions you're bad at. You really need to use your cats as learning tools and use them as in-depth research opportunities, and not just as, oh my god, I got this score or I got that score. And we've mentioned most of these. We'll get into Q&A later. I'll answer that question in a bit, no worries. We'll get into these. And I think I've mentioned most of what's on this slide. I'll just read out. The goal is to learn. So when you're solving a question, please don't solve lots and lots of questions. Try to solve a few, like block them maybe into 5 to 10 questions, and then pause to review them, and then learn from your mistakes, and only then progress on to the next set of questions. And that's it. That's pretty much it. You're done. You really should take a day off a week when you're studying, and you should also take a day off before the exam day. Like the day before the exam, all you should do is review your notes, basically, no more than a few hours of review at most. And that's it. You're good to go. You're good to crush the GMAT. And that's pretty much all you need to do. And I'll repeat what I said at the start. You don't need to be a genius to beat the GMAT. You don't need to have super fast reading speeds, or you don't need to be a human calculator, any of that stuff. You need to have a big toolbox of tools. You need to know when to apply those tools. And you need to be capable of self-reflection. You need to be capable of learning how to turn your mistakes into opportunities for learning. And of course, the winning study plan, such as we provide. And that's my part for now. We're now going to switch over to Michelle from ARINGO, who's going to talk about building that perfect admissions package. And afterwards, we're going to come back and we're going to do a short Q&A. And we're going to
Hi, everyone. I'm Michelle with ARINGO MBA Admissions Consulting. Could you all do me a favor and let's do the same thing that you did for Dave? Could you just send me a quick message in the chat and let me know that you can hear me? I feel like I'm quite prone to technical issues. Oh, thank you, Francisco. Thank you, Stephen. Thanks, David. Oh, you're all awesome. Thanks, Ty. Thanks, Shoko. I'm sorry if I'm saying any names wrong. This is fantastic. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So good evening or good morning to some of you around the world. Again, my name is Michelle, and I am with ARINGO MBA Admissions Consulting. And now that you've heard some great tips from Dave on the exam portion, which is a big part of this process, I'm here to talk about the rest. However, if you've attended some of our presentations in the past, the information I'm going to share tonight is a little bit different. I usually go over the general tips for success, and we will talk about that tonight. But this time I was really interested in our theme of round 1 is coming. And you'll see I'm definitely a big Game of Thrones fan, by the way. Team Stark, House Stark, all the way, unless it's Tyrion. But Tyrion's cool. It's not a Lannister. I really hope there are at least a few people here that know what I'm talking about right now, because I'm a big fan. Anyway, fun themes aside, want to talk to you all tonight about the fact that round 1 is indeed right around the corner. We have 4 weeks and counting at many of the top schools. And a big question I'm being asked right now is whether or not you should try to make those tight deadlines if you haven't already begun, or if you should be looking at round 2. So we're going to talk a bit about that. Now, I liked my nice dark gray for the Game of Thrones, but now I'm going to switch back to my nice bright ARINGO blue. This is me. I'm Michelle. Hello, hello. I'm in Portland. I have 2 dogs. I've been married for 16 years now. So, yep, I'm old. And in addition to being an excited education advisor at ARINGO, I am working on my PhD in higher education administration. Just need to finish that dissertation. Wish me luck. And then we can all, you can all call me Dr. Michelle if you want. But more importantly, ARINGO. So ARINGO has been in business for 15 years now. Here are some of our statistics that I'm proud to brag about. You can see the ARINGO statistic in blue compared to the school's general admissions rate. So pretty awesome statistics we have there, which have been verified by Ernst & Young. In our 15 years, we've helped over 4,000 applicants get into top MBA programs and counting. So if you are even just on the fence of hiring an expert to help you, please feel free to reach out. We offer complimentary consultations, answer your questions, tell you more about our services. So, as Dave said, enough sales. Oh, hey, Adam, thanks for the Game of Thrones shout out. I appreciate that. All right, so jumping into why we're here. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what these crazy rounds mean anyway and why they have an impact on when you should apply. We're going to do a little bit of a self-check. I'm going to give you an opportunity to self-assess where you are in the process to help you figure out if round one is a good idea or if you should be looking at round two. A few profile considerations to go along with that self-check. And then finally, where are you in the process? There's a lot of things to think about, such as your essays, whether you're working with a professional, where your GMAT or GRE score is, where the letters of recommendation are in the process, etc. So, enough overview, let's dive in. Starting with rounds, as I mentioned a moment ago. Most schools, again, there's lots of exceptions, have 3 rounds. Typically fall, winter, spring, known as round 1, round 2, round 3. Many of the top European schools have 4 to 5 rounds. Cornell has one as well. Most of the time, there is very little difference between the acceptance rates of round 1 and round 2. Just to make sure I didn't lose anybody at the end of that statement, I'm going to repeat. Between round 1 and round 2. Round 3, whole different story. So reach out to me if you're thinking about round 3, and we can talk a little bit more about that. But when the admissions data between rounds 1 and 2 have been evaluated for the top programs, we find that most of the time they admit about the same amount of candidates in round 2 as they did in round 1. The only exception would be, first of all, Harvard and Stanford. They have a more notable discrepancy in the amount of candidates they admit in round 1 versus round 2. So if you are looking at Harvard or Stanford, you might think about trying to get in your application in round 1, since they do have a history of applying more, accepting more candidates in round 1. Another exception is early decision programs, such as Columbia. There is a benefit to applying in these early rounds. Keep in mind, though, that they usually come with some type of binding agreement. Columbia's does, so you have to decide if it's suitable for you. But if a school is high on your list, and especially if they're your number 1 choice, and they offer an early decision round, I highly recommend trying to get in just to take advantage of that extra competitive edge. But with these exceptions I just covered, Harvard, Stanford, and early decision programs, most of the time, there is not a huge difference between round 2 and round 1, which is going to be something I'll be re-emphasizing in a moment here when we talk more about when you should apply. So here's some self-check questions. When did you decide to apply? And I don't necessarily mean when did you pick up your pen. I more mean when did you first decide that you wanted to go to business school? And then when did you decide that it was going to be now? Well, obviously next year in most cases, but when did you decide that you were going to apply this year? And when did you decide that you wanted to try and aim for round 1? The main reason I'm asking you this question, and we'll talk more about this as the presentation goes on, is because, as you see with my star down at the bottom here, you should already be well into your application process if you're looking at round 1. Now, don't worry, you don't need to click off of this presentation now and say, well, I guess I'm out of luck. We'll talk more about how you might still make it, but I just want you to keep that in mind, that you're going to be competing against candidates who have spent their entire summer, possibly even their spring, working on their applications. Again, consider how many application rounds there are. The fewer rounds a school has, the more important it will be for you to consider applying early. One great example this year, HBS has done away with round 3. That's not actually true. They have a 3rd round for their 2+2 program. But unless you are applying to 2+2, rounds 1 and 2 are your only choice. So again, once again, Harvard might be a program worth trying to make round 1. Are you working on your essays? If not, have you at least read the prompts? Do you know what they're asking you? Have you started brainstorming? And Give yourself credit. Brainstorming doesn't have to mean that you've sat down with a pen and a paper. Even if you've simply read the prompts and have just started thinking about how you might answer a question, that's already a few steps into the game. But it may or may not be enough. Next question. Are you working with an expert like ARINGO? One of the things that we do at ARINGO, in addition to helping our candidates prepare excellent applications, is we help them also prepare and plan their time frame, especially when they're applying to multiple schools, which all candidates should apply to at least 3 schools or more. So this is something that an expert admissions consultant can help you with too, is in planning out the next few months to help you determine what deadlines you can hit and how to make those. And then, have you taken the GMAT or the GRE? And you'll notice I made a big emphasis here on for the last time, because there is a big difference between someone who already has the score they like and is ready to dive into the applications versus a candidate who is still either preparing for the first time or preparing for a retake. So a couple things to ask about yourself, about your own personal profile. First of all, how many years of work experience do you have? I put age in quotations here because sometimes in our world we get a little caught up on, well, how old are you? Because you look at the class profile, you see the average student is 27, 28, 29. It's not that it matters so much how old you are. They're not looking at your birthday. What they are looking at, however, is the amount of work experience that you have since you graduated from your bachelor's program. Oh, thanks, Francisco. Yeah, let me know if I have a audio problem again. Thank you. So what they're more interested in is how much work experience you have post-bachelor's. So that's the first question. Keep in mind, at the top business schools, usually looking at about 3 to 5 years of post-bachelor's work experience at the time that you start the program. So if you are much below or above that, that might be a factor to consider in your application. Also, look into your crystal ball. Do you foresee promotions or other big accomplishments coming up? What about your extracurricular activities? Do you have them? Now, quick disclaimer, if you don't have them now, it's probably too late if you're applying this year. But it's another thing to ask yourself about your overall profile. Again, look at school rounds, where the acceptance rates at the specific schools you're interested in, how's your GMAT or GRE score, and how far along are you in your application. Now I'd like you to ask yourself, what is your profile going to look like if you apply now versus next round versus next year? So these are personal questions to consider. And part of the reason that I tell you to consider your future self, to look into your crystal ball, is because you want to be able to apply at the right time. Don't get too swept up in conversations about reapplicants. It's actually still a disadvantage to be a reapplicant at any top program. You want to put in your application right the first time, whether that means that you put it off until next year or if it means that you were going to try and hustle around 1 and now you're looking at round 2. So just a couple of housekeeping minimum checklists of things that you're going to need in order to apply. You need your CV or your resume. You're usually looking at anywhere from 1 to 5 essays per school. You need recommendations. You need your a GMAT or GRE score. If applicable to you, a TOEFL score. There's going to be an application. You'll need your transcripts, GPA, extracurriculars, short, middle, and long-term goals, and then you should also be networking with your schools. If anything on here is catching you off guard, I would say this could be a reminder of my comment earlier about how many candidates that are applying in round 1 have been working on this for quite a while. They've been working on their essays for several months, and they've probably even been preparing for this process for a year or more. So keep in mind that this isn't meant to be something where you just jump in one day. You absolutely want to be prepared and make sure that not only can you check off everything on this list, but that each one is as strong as possible. Oh, and in case you're wondering why I have those first 3 highlighted, just to notate that this is 3 areas that you have a lot of control over, but it's also where an expert can help you the most, because this is what they're going to use to determine how competitive you are. Now, we've already talked a lot about the GMAT or the GRE today, and I don't want to step on Dave's toes, so I'm not going to go into too much detail here, I'll leave it to the experts like Dave. But keep in mind that if you are either still preparing for your first attempt, or if you are preparing for a retake of the test, if you are looking at round one, you do need to be prepared to start working on your applications at the same time that you study for the test. This in itself is usually a big question for candidates to help decide whether or not they can still be realistically looking at round one, is by asking themselves how far away they are from having their target GMAT or GRE score. If you feel like you are still a ways off, if you know that you need to invest serious time, take that time and look at round two. Now, nothing's ever 100%. So if I haven't already said this at one point this evening, feel free to reach out to ARINGO. Again, we offer complimentary consultations. You can speak to myself or one of my awesome colleagues, and we'll help you evaluate your individual situation to decide if you might still be able to make round one for a school or two, or if you really should be shifting your focus to round two. So another piece that's very important is the letters of recommendation, which I highlighted on the previous screen. By now, if you're applying round one, not only should you already have chosen your recommenders, but you should have already talked to them. They should be expecting to support you if they're not already working, but you still have more to do. It's not a simple conversation of, will you recommend me? Yes, you will. Send them the form. Well, you can do that, and candidates do that, unfortunately. But if you want a strong letter of recommendation, here are some steps that you still need to take. You want to make sure that your recommenders are supportive of your decision. This is quite tricky. I have seen letters of recommendation that have been quite obvious that the boss, it's usually the boss, doesn't want their employee to leave the company to go to school. And despite good intentions, that has sabotaged candidates in the past. So you want to make sure that the person that is supporting you is truly supportive. Are they already working on your letters of recommendation? For round one, they should be. Are they prepared? And these are a few areas I mean in terms of how to know if they're prepared. Do they know what your narrative is? Do they know how you're trying to fit yourself in with each individual program and what it is looking for? So you want to make sure that they're not just going to simply copy and paste a letter off to every school, but that they are prepared to support your individual school narratives. And right now, if you aren't already working with an excellent consultant like the ones we have at ARINGO, you might be kind of wondering what I'm talking about. So again, reach out to us, because this is an area we can help into narratives and making sure that everyone supporting you knows how to support you well. Final thoughts. As I mentioned earlier, most candidates have been planning on applying for 2 years or more. So this is a serious undertaking. It's not to be rushed. If you have just recently decided to go to business school, round one, I can almost guarantee you, is too soon. You have a lot of work to put in on the front end. As I said, reapplications are not easy. Please get it right the first time. Seek professional advice. Recognize that time is ticking away, and realize that, especially for round one and pretty soon for round two, you're going to need to expect that much of your time outside of work is going to be dedicated to this process. Evenings, weekends, and then with holidays coming up around the corner, you need to determine for yourself if the holidays will be an asset or a detractor. What I mean is some candidates, the holidays that come up during round two are awesome. It's more time away from work. They're able to really jump in and bury themselves in the process. But I do have the occasional candidate where the holidays have so many additional commitments that it actually sets them back in their application. So factor that in too. And then finally, if you do choose to apply later, in other words, round two, still start now. We're officially in what I call early bird territory for round two. And if I had my wish for every candidate on this webinar today, it would be that you would be an early bird. The more time, the better, to prepare, to strategize, to brainstorm, and to narrow down your school selection. All right. So, final thought. We are here to help. I've already mentioned free consultations. I really would enjoy talking to you about your individual situation and helping you decide when the right time to apply would be and how we might be able to help you. I did give a little sneak peek here that I'm offering a special discount to everyone who has attended tonight. By the way, my Game of Thrones fans, Adam, check it out. If you look really close, it's a green explosion. I really hope that there's other happy Game of Thrones fans out there that appreciate my green explosion. But anyway, 10% off for you, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit more detail in a moment here. Okay, that was a lot of thanks, Adam. I know, scary. So thank you everyone for listening. I just shared a whole lot of information in a short period of time. So please do reach out. I promise I don't bite. All right, Dave, I'm lobbing it back over to you.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that informative and excellent presentation. What we're going to do now is we're going to put two small banners on the top of the screen. We're going to start off with an examPAL banner. This is the question Q&A time, by the way, so I'm just going to sort of explain what our packages are, and then we're going to go into Q&A. We are doing a very special package for round one. I have to say, as someone who's worked at examPAL for a while, I haven't seen such nice packages in a while. And you basically get 5 free things if you buy any of our package with the link in the webinar. And this is a free one-on-one tutoring session. This is a free session with ARINGO. And scholarship and financial aid by applying the experts. You get the GMAT's official guide for the GMAT, and you get a GMAT club test pack. So please click that link on the top of the screen. And as mentioned, in a minute or two, we're also going to put the special link for ARINGO at the top of the screen. So in the meantime, does anyone have any specific questions they'd like me to address? Adam, if I'm not mistaken, you were sent a link to our blog on how to study and also work at the same time. I can also talk about it now if you'd like, but please write in chat if you have questions. Could you talk a little bit of non-English speaker application? Francisco, if you mean the actual application process, so what you need to submit to business school, I think I'll ask Michelle to answer that in a minute or two because I'm just not the expert. If you mean preparing for the exam, then you will definitely need more time. It's hard to say exactly how much time because I've met non-native speakers who spoke excellent English and I've met non-native speakers who spoke rather poor English. The best way to do it is to basically try and see. So try a few reading comprehension questions or a few sentence correction questions. See if you sort of get what's going on or if you have no idea. It depends on whether you need to study all of the various grammar rules or not. And it depends how comfortable you are reading complex passages. Generally, we recommend an extra month of preparation for non-native English speakers. Any other questions in the meantime? And also, as mentioned, there is 10% off on all of ARINGO's deals, and you will see a link to that at the top of your screen now. Please use it. The best way to take notes during the exam. So this is something that you will see as you practice, which is to say when you practice, when you study for the GMAT, what you should do is you should mimic the specific note-taking conditions that you have on the exam. You don't actually have to have a laminated non-erasable sheet. You can use like a pencil and paper, pen and paper, but you should just take notes during the exam to see. In general, it's not an issue. I mean, you have enough pages. You have the markers. You can, during the break, if I'm not mistaken, you can ask for your sketchpad to be erased. So between sections, you can basically get a new sketchpad because they're erasing your old one. And what's most important about using your sketchpad is that you write clearly so that you understand what you've done. So it really helps, for example, if you're trying to eliminate answers, to just write A, B, C, D, and E on your sketchpad and then cross them out. it helps to draw a little box around the area of the specific question. So every new question that you do, you draw a box around it. It's just little organizational tips like this mainly. There's really nothing special about how you should use this sketchpad, except for reading comprehension, where there's a whole strategy of how to take notes, which we won't get into now. Michelle, would you like to switch over to the microphone to answer the questions live? Because I see that quite a few of the questions are aimed at you right now.
Usually you have all the questions. Okay, so absolutely, I'd be glad to. Okay, for applicants that have been self-employed or entrepreneurs, to whom do you suggest to ask for letters of recommendation? Alejandro, thank you. This is such a good question. So first of all, yes, customers can be a great recommender. What I recommend customers is that you think a bit about people that hopefully you've worked with for a while. So like an ongoing client would be preferable. And kind of like you would do if you did work for someone else, it's always nice if you can get somebody with a higher title. So for example, if your clients are businesses, if you could have someone who's high up the chain in that business recommend you, that can be a nice addition to the letter of support. Another idea is if you have a partner that you have worked with, that can be an excellent recommender as well. And I've even seen some creative examples where entrepreneurs have used business partners, not as in within the same company, but like vendors that they've had a long time relationship with as well. So feel free to get creative. I think what's most important is just thinking about who is going to be best able to speak to the strengths that you want the admissions committees to see. So I hope that's helpful. Let's see here. Also, I'm not sure if Francisco, if you wanted me to talk a bit about non-English speakers, what that means for applications. So feel free to just write another note here if you want me to give some tips there. Oh, and then Adam asked earlier about the dates that the programs start for these rounds that I spoke of. I'm really referring to your kind of typical 1 or 2 year full-time MBA program that starts in the fall. They will generally have these fall, winter, spring, or around 1, 2, 3 deadlines, rounds, as I've been talking about. But it does change if you're looking at a part-time program, an executive program, or a deferred enrollment program like that HBS that I was talking about earlier, HBS 2+2. They will have different deadlines at different times of the year and different start dates. So keep in mind that all of these can change if you're applying to a different type of program. Let's see here. And then I know I saw another question. I've been working for a major bank in a development program after I graduated from college for about 2.5 years and been progressing. Is that lack of time an issue? Adam, I would actually think that you could still be in a good place to apply, since that means that by the time you enter the program, you should have over 3 years of experience. And let me know if I'm calculating that wrong if you started at a different time of year. But if you have 2.5 years now, that tells me that a year from now, when you actually start the program, if that's the start dates you're looking at, then you would be fine. What's going to be most important is you've mentioned that you progress well. Progression is definitely a big part of it. It's not just about how much time has elapsed, but it's what you've accomplished within that time. I hope that helps. What do I need to say in the essay about teachers and the program? I'm not sure I understand the question, Francisco, although you, and I'm so sorry if this isn't relevant, but you have made me think of something that I meant to mention earlier when we were talking about recommenders. Question for the group, but I'm sorry I don't have a cool poll like Dave did. But can anyone tell me if it's a good idea to use a college professor from your undergraduate program as a recommender? Yeses or no's? for anyone that's still with me? Okay, so it was a trick question. Generally speaking, it's a no. You want to use workplace recommenders, like your boss or your boss's boss, partners, clients, like we talked about earlier. Really only a good idea to use a professor if you are either A, applying to a deferred admissions program, meaning that you are either a senior in college now or a recent graduate, or if you worked for a professor, like say as a teacher's assistant or in a lab situation where the teacher was, or professor, excuse me, was supervising. So that's just a fun fact for all of you, and I'm sorry if that wasn't relevant to your question. That's right, Javier. Thank you. No. Exactly. Thank you. Um, Perfect, Adam. Yep, you're good. Oh, okay, Francisco. Yes. Okay. So yeah. Sorry for all the sidebar information there. Actually, I would like to know if it's important to show to the admission team that I know what the details are of the program. Yes, absolutely. In fact, thank you for bringing up one of my favorite topics. This is another reason why I strongly encourage candidates to go on campus visits and go to info sessions, because one of the many important stakeholders you can meet on campus are professors. And then you get an opportunity to learn more about the classes that they teach. Don't get me wrong, I don't want to give anybody the impression that all you need to do is simply name drop, Dr. Brown's economics class or something like that. It's not that simple. But it absolutely makes sense if you can, in your application, while you're explaining why the program is your number one choice, if you can give some specific examples of courses that you're looking forward to taking and how you expect to contribute to them and what you expect to gain from them. It's a good question, Francisco. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I agree. Okay, Dave, I think I got all my questions. I'll turn it back over to you. Thanks, everyone. It was fun.
All right, guys. I think we have time for one last question before I bid you adieu for tonight. Any last questions? Okay, one question from Francisco and Adam. Who's going to be first? Thank you. Yes. What is your last question, Francisco? When are you too old for an MBA? Oh, wow. um, that's an admissions question again, isn't it?
I got it, Dave. But Dave, you know what? You and I have done so many webinars together. I feel like you should be able to answer these questions. I say that out of respect. So, Francisco, that's a really tricky question because I actually personally have seen candidates get into MBA programs in their 40s and 50s, which is not old, by the way. I turned 40 this year. But anyway, I go back to what I was talking about earlier. It's not so much about age. It's just that age tends to line up with how many years of work experience you have. Generally speaking, the further you get away from that nice sweet spot of like 3 to 5 years, particularly at a top 10 or even top 20 business school, the more likely it is that they're going to see you as a better fit for a different program, like a part-time MBA or an executive MBA. Those programs were designed for candidates with more work experience. And for the record, don't get me wrong, the full-time programs are competitive for a reason. There's all those cool recruiters and networking, et cetera, but I actually encourage more experienced candidates to give part-time and executive programs a serious look because you would have the opportunity to be in class with your peers. And there is something to be said for, sitting next to somebody who has work experience equivalent to yours versus someone who, frankly, once you're a little further down the path, a lot of students in a full-time program might feel a little green compared to your own experience. So try not to look at it for anybody listening that this might apply to, try not to look at it as just whether or not you can get in. Ask yourself what you're truly looking to get from the program, and if part-time or executive might actually be a better fit. Dave, I'm keeping the microphone. Somebody is typing another question for me.
I think we're out of time, though. So thank you very much to everyone who's attended. We're also available at examPAL on chat. You can, once you sign up, you can ask all the questions you want, and there will be someone to answer, whether it's a tutor or a customer support guy. This webinar will be uploaded. It will be emailed to you later on. Thank you for being here today. I hope you have learned A, how to ace the GMAT itself, and B, how to ace that admissions process. And please contact us, either us at examPAL or Michelle and her colleagues at ARINGO for any further relevant questions. Have a great evening and a fruitful round 1.